You are listening to Leading the Factory Forward with your host, Lynn Friest. We share interviews with manufacturing experts and strategies for embracing the digital future, recruiting a new workforce, finding new business. Lynn is an advanced manufacturing strategist and leadership consultant who is on a mission to show manufacturing leaders how to improve their current operations while preparing for a digital future. And here's your host, Lynn Friest.
Welcome to this episode of Leading the Factory Forward. This is episode 80, and it's how to improve your presentation skills and get people to listen to you. And it's a conversation with my good friend Rick Davis. At Leading the Factory Forward, our goal is to help you create a compelling future for yourself, your teams, and your organization. I encourage you to visit my website and download the summary at the bottom of the podcast episode. And you can use that as a tool to help you explore the ideas that we talk about. Or to help you get started on your journey in general and to stay up to date on new episodes, please download the free worksheet, 3 Steps You Need for a More Productive Workday. In this episode, we'll be talking with Rick Davis of the Davis Presentation Group. I've known Rick for several years and have always enjoyed working with him. Rick is a speaker and trainer, and he has a professional performance background. He's engaging and allows you to create interactive presentations so that people retain what your message is and enjoy themselves, and at the same time helping you enjoy yourself as a presenter. He's going to help you find ways to connect to the energy you need, as well as play with some ideas as how to connect with your audience, and finally, how to perform your presentation and make it fun for you and the people you're trying to share it with. So some of our talking points today are going to be, what lessons did Rick learn from performing that apply to presenting information? What are the common mistakes presenters make that keep them from getting results with their audience? How can we tell better stories in our presentation? And then finally, I'll let Rick share with you what are the things he actually does to help people become better presenters. Today, we're going to welcome Rick Davis from Davis Presentation Group. Thank you, Rick, for being here. And I'd like to start off with you just introducing yourself.
Lynn, I am a child of the 80s. I grew up in the 80s and absolutely loved everything about the 80s. I was in a small rural town called Sherrard, Illinois, and I have grown to just be a performer along the way. I was a stand-up comic, improv comic, voiceover actor, theater professional, just you name it. In the performance world, I probably did a game show host. And somewhere along the way, I was asked to do a lot of presentations, whether it was keynote speeches, workshops, and I kind of fell in love with that world too. And that's kind of where I landed is being able to help people perform better and present better. And I try to make the most of what they can do with their message.
So what are the some of the lessons you learned as you sort of built your business and got into this field of helping people with presentations?
Yeah. So in the stand-up world and improv world, that's all about comedy, right? So comedy, we talk about timing and delivery, timing of a joke or landing a punchline, those kinds of things that a lot of people miss in the world of comedy. So I'm sure you've heard some people deliver some really awful jokes that there was a reason for that, just because of the nuances of comedy. In theater, the things like projecting your voice and really belting things out there, blocking, knowing where to go on stage and have that big stage presence to command an audience. And in the voiceover world, there's things like making your words come alive. Like there's scripts that you have, but it's up to you to make things really pop from the page. And all of these things have one thing in common, and it's just making the audience feel better and do better.
As you think about helping people present, obviously they don't have your wealth of experience and stuff like that, but what are some of the things you start with as far as helping somebody become a better presenter?
Yeah, so I like to have those conversations with people first and kind of figure out what they know, what their struggles are, all that kind of stuff. And then from there, I get a nice picture of what they need. So a lot of it is just puzzle building, right? We have different things about ourselves that we need to work on, and everybody's different. But there are some typical things that a lot of presenters have, common issues, challenges, that kind of thing.
What are a few of those that probably I would recognize in myself even?
Well, let me get out the long list here. There are quite a few things that we can work on, and some presenters have just one or two of these things, and some have many or all of them. But people shouldn't feel bad about having these things. But let me go over a few of them here. One of the most common ones I see is that a lot of people tell themselves they can't or they shouldn't. So they can't be a good public speaker. They can't project their voice. They shouldn't tell that story that they kind of want to. Those things really limit us as presenters because the audience can pick up on that right away. They see that, oh, this person's kind of hiding from us. Another one is we tend to put the focus on ourselves instead of our audience. And this is what a lot of people get tripped up on, especially in the stage fright mode. We tend to think, oh no, they're going to judge me. They're going to look at me, all that kind of stuff. When once we think, I am just here to help my audience, the whole game changes. And then presentations become so much easier because you're just sharing advice. You're sharing tips and tricks, and you're just there to be helpful. So that is one that really trips people up, is just focusing on themselves. And then one I'm sure you're familiar with in your ag industry days is a lot of presentations have too much content and not enough meaning. So many presenters talk about the numbers and the facts and figures of things that they're discussing, but they don't talk about what those numbers mean. So instead of saying, yeah, our company grew 15% last year and just leaving it at that, find a way to say what that means. So that means now we can expand this area of our business, or we can hire somebody new, whatever that means for the business. In whatever topic you're talking about, even if you're talking about relationships, what does that mean? What do those numbers mean? So a lot of it is just kind of cramming all the content when we should only really be focusing on maybe 2 or 3 things at the most within our presentations, and then talking more about the meaning of those things.
Yeah, I know I've started shortening down my presentations in terms of the number of bullet points that I try to present. In my engineering days, it was 25 or 30, and now we're down to, as you say, kind of 3.
Yeah. There's a reason for that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's because we are deletion creatures. We can't absorb everything somebody's putting towards us. So we have to only grab those most important things. So if you can come up with 3 things, that's an easy number for people to remember. They can remember, oh, A, B, and C. Okay, that's all I got to know from what they were trying to tell me. Where when we bombard them with so many things, we lose track, and then we usually lose all of what was said.
Mm-hmm. In fact, I got some interesting feedback from a person who listens to my podcast regularly. He says, I can tell when you're presenting material and when you're just kind of riffing on an idea that you have. And he says, I really enjoy the second ones more often. He said.
Absolutely, because that's coming from you, right? Like, the wheels are spinning, and it's like, oh, yeah, and this too. Like, yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah. So it's, again, I'm at heart an engineer, so I like my bullet points, but I've tried to get away from that a little bit.
Well, so many people do what they've seen other people do, right? So when we see those polished speakers, we tend to just act just like them. Let's take CEOs, for instance. They are notorious for just doing that absolute polished version, which is almost a detriment to them, because when their presentations are too perfect, the audience grows distant from them because they can't connect. They can't relate to that kind of a presentation. But as an audience, we see what they're doing and they're like, oh, well, this person's doing really well. So that's what I must have to do. So, I'll just copy what they're doing. And we don't want to do that. We want to be more personable and relatable and just find those human things that we can connect to in our presentations.
And Rick, that leads me into another piece that I'm interested in, but I can't say I have any mastery over, and that's utilizing stories. It's interesting to me because on one hand, I love to tell stories about things that happened in life, in conversation, but I find it somewhat hard to do in presentations.
Yeah. Even in our personal world, stories play a big part of what we do. So I'll just ask you this, real plain and simple. Lynn, what did you do yesterday?
Well, I had a good day. It was a cold day outside, so I stayed inside. I had a really good conversation with a group of people about SCORE, a group helping young entrepreneurs, and I created a new coaching contract. So that was sort of the high points of my day yesterday.
Good. Now, you offered probably a little bit more than most people do during that kind of a question. But the one thing that we tend to leave out in our stories that makes a world of difference, no matter what kind of stories we're talking about, is details, right? So you said you stayed indoors and was staying warm. Well, I'm sure there was a lot more going on while you were indoors. Like, were you reading a book? Were you watching a TV? If so, what shows were you watching? What book were you reading? That kind of stuff. When you had the conversation with the people that you were talking to, who was there? You don't have to give full names, but even a few first names, Gary, Sue, Travis, whatever it is. When we give those kinds of details, what that does is it paints a picture for our audience to put them alongside of us in the story. So they're coming with us in our journey instead of just being told a report, right? Because that's the difference in storytelling, is just making it feel like it's something that is alive and it's something that has a life to it, where generally we tend to just say the basic things that can be a report or a chronicle of events. And that's pretty boring for people. So a lot of people don't remember what those stories are, and they just delete it out of their brains and they move on. But we want our stories to have a lesson to them for whatever our content is. So then once we establish those details, we can really expand on what the lesson is within the story. That makes a world of difference. And something else that makes a big difference in our stories too is, have you watched any interviews lately on TV, whether it's like political shows or talk shows or anything like that? And a lot of them are virtual interviews now. Mm-hmm. And the host will say, "Hey, Trevor, it's great for you to join us today." And Trevor will respond with something like, "I'm excited to be here." It's that tone, right? That tone of, he said, "I'm excited to be here," but he showed no emotion with it. So if you're going to say something, you have to match it, because what happens is when Trevor says, "I'm excited to be here," just as plain as that, the audience's subconscious spends time thinking, "Oh, he said he's excited, but he's not showing me that he's excited." So then it becomes a credibility issue. We think, I don't know if I can trust him because he's not saying what he says he means. That is a huge detriment. We do not want to do that to our audience. And then also they spend time thinking, "Oh, I wonder why he said it that way," instead of saying something different. So there's a lot of different things that go into our stories. Emotions, characters. If you can supply some kind of character, like if you say she was an older person, well, describe what that older person looked like, because we love painting a picture and trying to attach our brains to somebody we know that may resemble the person you're talking to. Dialogue is something. So if you have a dialogue between two people, tell us what you were saying. And it can be that mode of, I shared with him, "Hey, please don't touch that." And he said, "Well, it's my son's. I have to take it." Just going back and forth in that kind of a dialogue is engaging for an audience. So we have to find a way to add more to our stories. Again, otherwise it's just a report.
The other thing that occurred as you were sharing there was that often in my report out, as it were, of my day, I don't talk enough about how it affected me or how I felt. And sometimes I think whether I share it through my tone of voice or explicitly, it sounds like that might help people connect too. It's not just what you did, but how you felt about it.
Absolutely. And that's one of the exercises I use with a lot of people, is to just have them practice that kind of thing and notice the reactions from people. So share good news with somebody, but say it in the opposite way of how you really feel. So if you said, "Hey, I got a raise," tell somebody "I got a raise." Watch their reaction, where it's good news that we're sharing, but we see that something's off here. And then once we pick up on that, we pay more attention to the emotions that we're using in our words, and we can match them. So we want to bring people with us. We're going to get them excited if we say we're excited. "I am excited to be with you today, Lynn." Like, that is what we want people to feel. So that's how we need to respond.
Yeah, I think that, again, it's probably stage fright that I had in the past, that I would be very monotone and, be the talking head and whatnot with my fingers clenched on the podium. And
yeah,
I think earlier what struck me is really thinking about the audience. How am I trying to help them? And then it really helps me get out of my own head and then loosen up and say, hey, this is what I'm hoping for you to get out of this.
Yeah. And I would add to this that storytelling takes rehearsal too, right? I mean, we got to find those ways of saying it out loud and practicing it, because we tend to think, oh, I know what those bullet points are in my head, so that's all I have to get to, where actually stories are much better when we kind of flesh things out and we try different ways of telling them. And when we tell them, we can always change things up a little bit to make it more interesting for ourselves to tell. Because if we're telling the same story over and over again, we have to kind of freshen it up in some different ways. So find ways to do that. You can add different things to it. Add those characters, those dialogue lines, the different emotions, different details, anything to just make it more fresh for you to relay to somebody else. But the rehearsal is probably the one thing that a lot of people just don't do. I mean, it is clunky. I get it. I mean, I get that we're not used to doing that. We're not used to saying stories out loud and practicing a full, engaging story. We just kind of say the basics of what we're doing because we tend to think, this person probably doesn't care what I'm saying, or I just want to move on to something else. Where if we spend the time to actually develop those stories in any situation, it doesn't have to just be a keynote speech. It can be just an interaction with a friend or at a networking event, something like that. We're going to have people remember more of what we're saying.
I remember reading an article about people who do TED Talks and how most of them will have fully rehearsed it like 150 times or something before they give their 17-minute speech and stuff. And it's an interesting dichotomy for me, is that to appear more natural, you have to practice more.
And the thing is you're not reciting it word for word, right? You're not reading it from a script and just saying those lines over and over. You're just remembering where you start and where you end, and then kind of fleshing things out in between. So once you get to a certain section of, let's just take, for example, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. How would you describe Goldilocks? Like, play with some different ways you could describe what Goldilocks looks like. When you get to the Three Bears, tell us what the Three Bears look like. What do they sound like? Mm-hmm. Come up with different voices for them. Practice those kinds of things. Those kinds of fairy tales and traditional stories are great for practice, because we can just kind of play around with, what would I add to this? What would make this more interesting? So then when we get to our own stories, our personal stories, we kind of develop that flow of, I could add this to this spot, or I could make this punchline stand out by adding this.
So it's kind of bringing this around to where, as our audience is sitting there saying, hey, this sounds like a lot of work, and et cetera, et cetera. But can you give some examples of the impact that people found that improved after they'd spent some time being more intentional about how they're delivering their presentation?
Yeah. So the one thing that really stands out in my brain from the people that I've worked with is that they tend to get more credibility, more respect, and in some cases, even more money. Some people have asked for more money because they have become a better presenter. So in the storytelling world, a lot of people think, I'm just adding this story because that's what I'm supposed to do. Like, everybody's telling stories, and that's just something I got to do. Lessons are what stories are all about, right? So once we tell a story, it has to have a meaning. It has to mean something for our audience. We can't just say a story just to tell a story. We have to have that lesson in what it means. The flow of the transition in the story, so we go from the story into the lesson, that has to be smooth. It can't just be that's my story. Now, here's the lesson. Like, it can't be just that robotic. It has to just feel nice and conversational. Otherwise, we tend to just lose what the message is from the speaker. So if I'm in the audience and somebody tells a story, I'm going to remember more of that story and the message they are delivering if they make it interesting to me. I'm going to remember who they are. Generally, when we share stories, we talk about some of the personal things we like. I shared that I'm a kid of the 80s earlier. So guess what people can come up to me and talk about? Oh my gosh, did you ever listen to Wham or George Michael? Those kinds of things. That is just giving audience connection points to remember more of who you are and what your message is about. Because we want to be seen as the resource, right? We want to be the go-to person for people. And with stories, that plays a huge part.
Another thing in today's world, obviously, we've gone through a year of a lot of disruption, but again, leaders of businesses or in whatever, they often have to give a message with maybe short notice in today's world. So do you kind of practice your skills in a general format so that you're more prepared when the message that has to be delivered quickly comes up?
Yeah. So one thing that really helps is developing that 60-minute presentation for a 5-minute talk. So what I mean by that is once you have your full talk established, like where you want to go, some of the key points you want to hit on, then we can trim away a lot of what that is in order to still get our main message across and even share something that people can use, like a call to action of some sort. Something that I share with a lot of my presenters, there's 2 different structures for a shorter kind of a presentation. And one of them is called the Ssrs structure, and it stands for story, significance, relevance, support. So again, we start with our story. The significance is the lesson from that story. So we say, here's what I learned. The relevance is how it relates to your audience. So you might say, so what this means for you is, and then we relate how the story and the lesson relates to our audience. And then the support is giving them something to do. It could be writing something down. It can be reinforcing it with an exercise, whatever it is in that short amount of time that you have. Just getting that kind of a structure makes it so easy to deliver a small 5 to 10 minute talk if that's all the time you have. Another structure, which is kind of similar but has different mindset around it, is called the vowel structure. And I want to make sure I said that correctly. Vowel with a V, not a B, because some people bowels. No, what are you talking about your bowels for? But I go through the A, E, I, O, U, and always Y, not sometimes Y, the always Y. And here's what those stand for. The A is for astonish. We want to start by astonishing our audience somehow. And that can be a number of things. It can be a jaunting statistic. It can be a joke. It can be entertainment. It doesn't have to be. A lot of people think they have to entertain and be silly and wacky. That's not what it's about. It's just about engaging the audience somehow. So that's when we get to the E, and that's for enlighten your audience. And when we enlighten them, that's when we're delivering our content or our main message of what we want to share. The I is involve them. And we want to include our audience in some fashion. So we're having a conversation with them. We're asking them questions. Again, maybe doing an exercise of some sort. And then an O is we offer them. So if we have something that we're sharing, if we're selling something, we can make our offer then. And offer doesn't have to necessarily be in the selling phase either. An offer can be, hey, I want you to just do better. I want you to improve. I want you to build your skills. That is the offer you are making. And then the U is we always want to end by uplifting our audience. We want them to end on a high note. What that does is it just makes us remember the person more, because when we feel good, we do better. And if we know the people that make us feel good and do better, we're going to remember them a lot more. And then the Y stands for you. We want you to bring you, yourself, completely and always to every presentation. A lot of presenters hide who they truly are when they present. And the more, again, authentic, which is an overused term, but it is true. We just want to see the full version of who you really are, because when we present, we tend to go into that robotic mode of what other people are doing instead of that conversational mode when we're hanging out with our friends and we're just having fun. That's the kind of presenter more people should actually be.
Yeah, great. I'm learning a lot just in our conversation here. And so I appreciate that. I don't want to forget, Rick, you obviously help people. What are the kind of services you offer for people and help them with?
Yeah. So my business for the last 3 years has been all about presentations, like really helping people deliver a better message, learn those performance strategies that I learned through the years that really help in presentations. But what I'm understanding from a lot of people I work with is that it actually fits into a larger umbrella. So I'm kind of expanding my business into delivering more help in networking, in interactions, in team meetings that a lot of companies and corporations have. Maybe it's social interactions that you need help with. I'm helping them in that way too. So it's more about connecting and finding those interactions that can be more effective. But the way I work with a lot of people, and it varies, I work with companies, corporations as a consultant. I work in some group coaching formats, and I specialize in a lot of one-to-one work. So if somebody has a presentation that they want to learn or start, I can help you build it, or I can give you some of the elements to just try on your own and off you go. So I work in a number of ways.
Great. Well, it's one of those things I've learned, like a lot of things in life, that conversation is very common, but it's not common that it's very good.
It's so true.
I appreciate that. Any other last thoughts you have for us, Rick?
Yeah, there's a lot of different nuances to presentations, and something that people just don't think about is little things like what to do with your hands. A lot of people move their hands around, a lot of nervousness that they tend to have, the stage fright, how to manage that kind of stuff. And even when I began this podcast, Lynn, and you can kind of hear it in my voice right now, I've got like a little tickle in my throat, and just pausing and taking a sip of water, which is what I'm going to do right now. That's okay. That pause is okay, because what those pauses do is it gives our audience time to think. It gives them time to just absorb what's going on, settle in, all that kind of stuff. It's uncomfortable as heck for a lot of presenters. We're like, oh gosh, dead silence. I don't want that for my presentation. But it actually is a benefit more than it is a detriment. So yeah, those kinds of things. If anybody is interested in learning more, I'm always willing to help. And in fact, Lynn, what I'd love to do, if you're okay with this, is like the first 20 listeners listening to this that want some help with their presentations, if they email me with a subject headline that says, Lynn sent me, I'll be happy to schedule a 30-minute spotlight session with them to help them in their presentations, interactions, anything they kind of have in the back of their brain that they want to work on.
Well, thank you very much, Rick. That's a very generous offer. I appreciate that. I'll put my name in first for that one.
You got it. You got it.
And yes, we will include all your contact information in the show notes for this, as well as the email. And we'll re-mention your special offer. I thank you very much for that generous offer.
Well, I appreciate you. And anybody listening, I know you have that thing in your brain that says you shouldn't or can't be a better presenter. And I know from working with people who thought they were the world's worst that you can. I know you got it in you. It's just working those kinks out and just developing that skill, because that's all it is. It's a skill. And that's what I want to see more people focus on, is finding a way to have their message help other people.
Well, again, thanks, Rick. And you have a great week.
You too, Lynn. Awesome to be with you.
Again, my deepest thanks to Rick for sharing his insights and knowledge on becoming great at speaking to audiences. We talked about what lesson did Rick learn from performing that he applies to presenting now or helping others present. What are some of the common mistakes that presenters make that keep them from getting the results that they want with their audience? How can we tell better stories? And finally, I think Rick shared some of the ways that he could help you should you need it. Again, many thanks to Rick. So what's up next? Again, we're going to continue a mix of solo episodes and interviews with experts. Some will be in manufacturing, but also some in areas that can help you build your business or build a life. And also in one or more episodes during the month, I'll be sharing my thoughts and ideas on becoming a silver entrepreneur, and also how silver talent might be able to help you in your business in the future. Finally, I encourage you to visit my website and download the summary at the bottom of the podcast as you start exploring the ideas we talked about with Rick. And to help you get started on your journey and to stay up to date on new episodes, please download the free worksheet, 3 Steps You Need for a More Productive Workday. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.